I am Harrison Blackwood, 68 years old, and my family thinks I'm a washed-up old fool. I just finalized the $35 million sale of my company. I threw a retirement party expecting to announce my plan to donate the entire fortune. But just before the toast, I watched my daughter-in-law Madeline slip a powder into my champagne. She and my son wanted to make me look senile to seize the money. So when no one was looking, I quietly switched my glass with her mother's. Within minutes, her mother Cynthia began screaming that the walls were melting. Before I continue this story, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that underestimating someone is the biggest mistake you can make. I sat for the last time in my old office. The leather on my chair was cracked, groaning a familiar complaint under my weight, a sound I'd heard every day for 40 years. On the faded oak desk in front of me, the final contract was signed. Blackwood Logistics, the company I had built from 2 sputtering trucks and 40 years of my own sweat, was officially sold. $35 million, a clean, simple number for a very complicated life. The sound of the door swinging open broke my focus. Dad, you need help with this junk. Leo, my only son, and his wife Madeline walked in. They were helping me pack for retirement. I used that word retirement because it was simple. The truth, selling the company and donating the assets, was far too complicated for them to understand. Madeline, always the one in charge, marched straight to the shelf holding my awards. She picked up the Entrepreneur of the Year 2005 trophy, a heavy glass obelisk. "This one can probably stay Harry," she said. She always called me Harry as if we were peers, not as if I was her father-in-law. She weighed it in her hand, her expression bored. "The rest, I think we should just toss them. Get them out of the way. You're retired now after all. Keeping this stuff just clutters things up." Her voice was the kind people use on a child or on an old man they think is losing his mind. I looked at the wall. The Operational Excellence Award from the National Trucking Association, the plaque for community service, the photo of me with the governor. "Toss them," she said, as if it was garbage. "Madeline's right, Dad," Leo chimed in, avoiding my gaze. He always avoided my gaze when he felt guilty or weak. "We should streamline things. You'll be moving into a smaller place, right? A condo, maybe. There won't be room for all this stuff." I let them treat me this way. I've learned to hide my strength. In business, if your competitor doesn't know how many assets you have, you always win. I applied the same rule to my family, but for a different reason. I wanted Leo to stand on his own 2 feet. "All right, Leo, if you think that's best," I said, my voice weary. They had no idea. They didn't know about the $35 million sitting in an escrow account, waiting for my signature. They just saw an old widower in a small rented office in an industrial park about to retire with what they assumed was a meager 401k. They saw a future burden, a mouth to feed. They never asked how I built this company. They never asked why I stayed in this shabby office instead of moving to a glass tower downtown. I liked it here. It was real. It smelled of motor oil and burnt coffee. It was the place my late wife Clara brought me lunch every single day for the first 20 years. Madeline dusted off her designer jeans as if my awards had left dirt on her. "Well, that's settled. Now about the party." She turned to me, plastering on that bright fake smile. "Dad," Leo said, reading from his phone, a task that seemed to require all his concentration. "My in-laws are flying in from Boston this Saturday. I've booked a table at the Crest, 7 p.m. You need to wear your best suit." The Crest, the most expensive restaurant in the city, a place where a bottle of water costs $50 and the wait list is 3 months long. "Oh," I said. "That sounds formal. I'm not sure." "It's fine," Madeline interrupted, her eyes scanning my work suit, a suit I'd owned for 10 years. "And Harry, please, let me buy you a new tie. That one you have it's just shabby. My parents are very detail-oriented. They're sophisticated people. Sophisticated. A lovely word for snobbish and judgmental. Their pity was a raw insult. They wanted me presentable for her wealthy family, like an accessory they needed to polish so I wouldn't embarrass them. They had no idea I owned a 1/3 stake in the building. The crest was in a real estate investment I'd made a decade ago. "Thank you, Madeline," said, leaning into the role. "You're so thoughtful. I don't know what I'd do without you kids." She smiled, satisfied by my submission. "Of course, Harry. That's what family is for." The next day, I was in Griffin's office. Unlike my dusty den in the industrial park, Griffin's office was on the 50th floor of the U.S. Bank Tower. Glass steel and dark mahogany overlooking the entire city. Griffin has been my attorney for 30 years. He's the only one who knows the real Harrison Blackwood. "Harry, are you sure about this?" Griffin asked for the 10th time. He pushed the thick binder across the desk. "The entire 35 million, minus 1 million for Leo. Are you sure he'll be okay with that?" "He's your son." I looked out the window at the cars moving like tiny insects far below. I thought of Clara. I remembered her eyes in those last days in the hospital. She died of a rare blood disorder, a disease the doctors said was curable in the near future if only the research funding existed. "I promised Clara," I said, my voice thick. "She was with me when I had 2 rusty trucks and a dream. She believed in me. When she got sick, all my money couldn't save her. But it can save someone else." I signed the last page of the Clara Blackwood Research Foundation charter. It would fund the very hospital that tried to save her. "Leo has a job," I said, my voice firm again. "He has a degree. He has a dynamic wife." I chose the word carefully. "He'll be fine. $1 million is more than enough of a head start for anyone. It's a hell of a lot more than I ever had." Griffin nodded, collecting the documents. "The transfer will be finalized Monday after your retirement party on Saturday." "Good," I said. "I want to tell the family myself first." I worked late finalizing the handover at the old office. When I got home, the house was dark. Leo and Madeline must have gone out. I walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water, not bothering with the lights. The glow from the streetlights was enough. I was about to head upstairs when I heard them. Whispers. Angry, urgent whispers from the living room. Madeline's voice, sharp as a razor, cut through the darkness. $1 million, Leo. Are you kidding me? The old man sells the entire company for 35 million and he's leaving you 1 million. I froze in the dark hallway. A cold dread washed over me. How did they know Griffin would never... "Shh, keep your voice down." Leo's voice was frantic. "He could be home any minute. I accidentally saw an email on his computer this afternoon when I was helping him. Helping him. He'd been snooping. He was drafting the documents with Griffin. 35 million, Madeline, and he's giving it all away. To some stupid foundation in Mom's name." I leaned against the wall, my breath caught in my chest. The betrayal tasted like acid. Accidentally. He had violated my trust, rifled through my private correspondence. He's senile. Leo's voice cracked with rage. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's throwing away our future, our kids' future. What the hell are we supposed to do with $1 million in this city? It's not even a down payment on a decent house in your parents' neighborhood. I heard Madeline pacing her heels, digging into the Persian rug I'd bought in Istanbul. "Calm down, Leo. You're panicking. Panicking. Don't you get it? He's going to announce it at the party. That stupid retirement party. Once it's public, we can't do anything. The money will be gone. It'll be out of our reach forever." There was a long, heavy silence. A silence so cold it felt solid. Then I heard Madeline's voice. It was slow, deliberate, and full of venom. "Then we have to stop him. He can't make the announcement if he isn't coherent." "What do you mean?" Leo asked. "I mean," she said slowly, "the party on Saturday. That's our chance. His old partners will be there. My parents will be there. Everyone will see that he's not well. Everyone will see he needs to be taken care of. That he needs someone to manage his assets for his own good. I held my breath, clenching my fists. My nails dug into my palms. They weren't just planning to steal. They were planning to destroy me. To have me declared incompetent. To lock me away. For the next 2 days, I played the part of my life. I was the perfect, gentle, slightly confused old man. I complained about my aching back. I forgot where I put my keys. I was the perfect prey. On Friday morning, the day before the party, Madeline stopped by the house alone. Leo was at work, a mid-level marketing job he despised, one I knew he only did for show. "Harry," she chimed, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You look so tired. Are you sleeping okay?" "Not too well, dear Tom." I lied, playing the part. "I guess it's the big change. Retirement is a big step, you know." "I know," she said, placing a sympathetic hand on my shoulder. "Which is why I brought you something." She reached into her expensive handbag and pulled out a small, unlabeled brown plastic vial. "I bought you some special vitamins. They're all natural. A friend of mine in alternative medicine recommended them. They'll help you relax and be at your best for the party tomorrow night." I took the vial. The cap wasn't safety sealed. It looked like an old bottle of eye drops repurposed. I opened it and pretended to smell the contents. "Smells a little strange, dear." "Oh, that's just the herbs," she lied, smooth as glass. "Valerian root and chamomile. Very calming." I fought to keep my face neutral. I worked my way through business school by working the night shift at a pharmacy. I know valerian. I know chamomile. This was not it. I recognized the faint synthetic chemical odor. This was not an herb. This was a high-dose benzodiazepine crushed into a fine powder, or worse, maybe GHB. Something that when mixed with champagne would be devastating. It wouldn't kill me. They were smarter than that. It would induce severe confusion, slurred speech, loss of balance, paranoid delusions. It would make me look exactly like a senile old man suffering a public breakdown. They had planned it perfectly. They would have me publicly humiliated in front of my oldest partners and her sophisticated family. They would call an ambulance. They would rush me to the hospital. And they would begin the legal proceedings to gain conservatorship over my $35 million fortune. "Thank you, Madeline," I said, my voice intentionally shaky. "You are so thoughtful. I'll take it right before we leave tomorrow." "That's a good idea." She smiled, the smile of a predator that knows its prey is trapped. "You'll feel much better." "Well, I have to run. I'll see you at the Crest tomorrow, 7 o'clock sharp." The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, I was on the phone with Griffin. My hand was steady. My voice was ice. "She's here. She just delivered the vitamins." "I'm calling the police," Griffin said, instantly, his voice tense. "This is conspiracy to commit assault, Harry." "No," I interrupted him. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "She doesn't want to kill me. She wants to own me. She wants me declared incompetent. If I cancel, if we call the cops now, it's her word against mine. They'll just find another way. A more permanent way." "Harry, you're insane. This isn't a boardroom negotiation. This is your family." "No," I said. "They stopped being my family the moment they decided my money was worth more than my mind. The party goes on, Griffin. Let them play their hand. I want to catch them in the act. I want them to destroy themselves." "How?" Griffin demanded. "I want you to make sure the security at the Crest answers to you. I want high-definition cameras on my table. I want every angle, especially the large gilt mirror on the east wall. I want a perfect, clear shot of everything that happens at that table. I want it all recorded." Griffin was silent for a long moment. I could hear him breathing heavily. "All right, Harry," he finally said, his voice heavy with resignation. "Your funeral, or theirs. I've been playing high-stakes games for 40 years, Griffin, I said, looking at the small brown vial in my hand. This is one game I have no intention of losing. I put the vial in my suit pocket. Tomorrow night the performance would begin, and I wouldn't be the only one acting. The Crest was not a restaurant. It was a cathedral built to worship money. The ceilings were 2 stories high, dripping with crystal chandeliers that cast a warm, golden light across the imported marble floor. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and rare flowers. A string quartet played softly in the corner. This was Madeline's choice, of course. A place designed to impress. A place designed to make someone like me feel small. And I intended to play the part. I walked in, and the maitre d', a tall man in a flawless tuxedo, looked me up and down. His eyes paused for just a fraction of a second on my suit. It was my oldest one. A dark charcoal wool suit from Hart Schaffner Marks, 20 years old. The cut was classic, which to them just meant old. It was immaculate, but it wasn't the shiny, tight-fitting trash they wear today. And then there was the tie. The one Madeline had bought me. It was a thin polyester nightmare with a garish blue pattern. It felt like plastic against my collar. I wore it specifically because she gave it to me. It was the perfect final touch for my costume. The senile old fool. The restaurant was filled with 200 of my closest friends and family. I saw Jim and Robert, my old VPs, standing by the bar. They were men who had been in the trenches with me, men who had seen me turn 2 trucks into a multi-million-dollar logistics empire. They watched me walk in with respect, raising their glasses. They knew who I was. Then there was the other side of the room. Leo's and Madeline's friends. Young loud, dressed in the latest fashions, their faces glowing from their phones. And in the center of it all, at the main table, was her family. I felt the familiar weight of the small unlabeled vial in my suit pocket. The vitamins Madeline had given me. I wasn't the only one in costume tonight. She was in her costume too. The loving, concerned daughter-in-law. I walked toward the main table. I saw Leo first. He looked nervous, sweating slightly in his expensive suit. Then I saw Madeline. She was wearing a red dress that was probably worth more than my first truck. She saw me. Her eyes scanned my old suit, landed on the cheap tie she had bought, and I saw her flinch. I saw the shadow of pure, unadulterated embarrassment cross her face. Perfect. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for the viper to strike. Leo saw me approaching and quickly stood up his chair, scraping loudly on the marble floor. "Dad, you made it." He gave me a quick, awkward pat on the shoulder, his hand damp with sweat. Madeline stood beside him, her smile as fixed as a doll's, the red dress a slash of color against the room's gold decor. "Harry, you look comfortable," she said. But my focus was on the woman seated at the table, Cynthia, Madeline's mother. She was a carbon copy of her daughter, just 25 years older, preserved by what must have been a small fortune in cosmetic procedures. She had the same sharp, assessing features, the same cold blue eyes, and the same unmistakable aura of entitlement. She was draped in diamonds that glittered angrily under the massive chandeliers, a silent, vulgar announcement of her wealth. Next to her sat her husband, a man named Paul. He was a non-entity, a soft, paunchy man in a suit that was clearly expensive but hung on him like a drape. He looked like an accessory she had purchased to match her handbag. He just nodded as I approached, not even bothering to stand or make eye contact. Cynthia, however, sized me up in less than a second. Her eyes performed a cold calculation, raking over my 20-year-old suit, lingering on the polyester tie with a look of profound disappointment, and then dismissing me completely. She didn't offer to shake my hand. She just gestured vaguely with a heavily ringed hand to the empty chair beside her. "Harry," she said, her voice dripping with a condescending sweetness that set my teeth on edge. "How lovely to see you. I'm so glad you've finally decided to take a rest." I sat down. The chair was cold against my back. "It's a big step, Cynthia," I murmured, leaning into the role of the frail old man. Cynthia laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, like ice cracking. She leaned in not to me, but to her husband, though her voice was loud enough for the entire table to hear. "Oh, it's the best step, Harry. Madeline told us all about it. You're planning to move into a high-end nursing home. What a wise decision." My blood ran cold. A nursing home. So that was the narrative they were spinning. It wasn't just about making me look foolish at a party. They were already building the story for my complete disappearance from public life. They had already picked out my cage. They had already decided where to put me once I was no longer in control of my faculties or my money. She didn't wait for me to respond. She turned her attention back to me, her smile like a surgeon's blade. "Honestly, at your age, it's really for the best. It's better to let the younger, sharper minds make the decisions, don't you think?" She glanced at Leo and Madeline with a proud smile, as if they were geniuses for figuring out how to dispose of their aging burden. Sharper minds. I looked at Leo, my son. He was now intensely studying the bread basket, tracing the woven pattern with his finger, completely unable to meet my gaze. I looked at Madeline, who was smirking into her water glass, enjoying the show. And then I looked back at Cynthia, this woman who knew nothing about me, this woman who was casually carving up the last years of my life like it was the steak she was about to order. Sharper minds. I thought about the $35 million deal I had just closed. A deal so complex it took 6 months of brutal round-the-clock negotiations with a team of cutthroat lawyers from Zurich. I thought about the logistics empire I had built from 2 rusty trucks, while this woman was probably picking out china patterns for her wedding registry. I thought about the fact that I owned a 1/3 stake in the very building we were sitting in, a silent investment that paid for her champagne 1,000 times over. I mean, the burden of a big house. She went on, her voice now a performance of fake sympathy for the other guests. The stress of managing finances, paying bills. It's all just too much for one person. It's so wonderful that you have Leo and Madeline to take all of that off your plate. You can just relax, paint, or whatever it is people like you do. People like you. The words hung in the air, heavy and foul. She didn't just see me as old. She saw me as poor, incompetent, and irrelevant. My worn suit, my cheap tie, my small retirement from a small company. It all fit her perfect, narrow-minded narrative. She was the wealthy, sophisticated matriarch, and I was the charity case they had to tolerate for one uncomfortable evening. This was the family Leo had married into. This was the mentality that was now poisoning my son, eating away at whatever backbone I had tried to build in him. This woman wasn't just insulting me, she was giving Madeline the green light. She was validating the entire conspiracy. She was confirming that in their world I was disposable. I felt the small, hard vial in my pocket. The vitamins. I looked up at Cynthia and gave her a small, shaky smile, the best one I could muster. "You are so right, Cynthia. It's a great comfort. A great comfort to know my children are taking care of everything." She beamed a look of absolute victory on her face, mistaking my tactical retreat for genuine weakness. "Exactly. See, Paul, Harry understands. He's a practical man." She patted my hand. It wasn't a gesture of kindness. It was a gesture of ownership, like checking a piece of furniture for dust before deciding to throw it out. "Now," she announced to the table, "let's order some champagne. This is a celebration after all. A celebration of new beginnings." Oh yes, I thought to myself. It certainly was. Just not the beginning she was expecting. I just smiled. A small, vague smile that I had perfected over the last 48 hours. It was the smile of a man who wasn't entirely sure where he was, and Cynthia took it as agreement. She patted my hand again, her diamonds scratching my skin. "Good man," she murmured, as if calming a nervous dog. Across the room, I watched Leo and Madeline. They weren't celebrating. They were pacing. They were circling the room like anxious predators, but their eyes kept darting back to me and then to the large ornate clock on the far wall. 7:35 p.m. They were anxious. Leo kept wiping his palms on his suit trousers, leaving dark, damp marks. Madeline was twisting the stem of her empty water glass back and forth, her knuckles white. They knew the schedule. At 8 p.m., just after the appetizers, I was scheduled to go to the podium and give my retirement speech. That was their deadline. That was the moment I would publicly announce the $35 million donation to the Clara Blackwood Research Foundation. If I made that speech, their plan was finished. The money would be gone, publicly committed. They had to act before then. They had to ensure that the man who walked up to that podium was not Harrison Blackwood, the founder and CEO, but Harry Assange, the senile, confused old fool who couldn't be trusted with his own checkbook. I saw Madeline walk over to Leo, her red dress cutting through the crowd. She said something sharp and low into his ear. He nodded, his face pale and slick with a fine sheen of sweat. He looked like a cornered animal. My son. He looked like a man being led to his own execution. In a way, he was. Madeline took a deep, steadying breath, and that brilliant false smile snapped back onto her face. She signaled a waiter who immediately rushed over with a silver tray. On it was a freshly opened bottle of Dom Perignon and 6 elegant, empty champagne flutes. She dismissed the waiter with a quick wave. She would handle this herself. She lifted the tray and began walking toward our table. Her movements were graceful, practiced. She had hosted enough high-end parties to make it look effortless. But I could see it. I could see the almost imperceptible tremble in her left hand, the one holding the tray. She was nervous. Good. "Champagne for our head table?" she announced, her voice a little too high, a little too bright. She set the tray down on a nearby stand and began placing the glasses one by one. One for Cynthia, one for her silent husband Paul, who barely looked up from his phone, one for Jim and Robert, my old partners, who smiled gratefully, one for Leo, who stared at his empty glass as if it were a loaded gun, and finally one for me. She picked up the last glass. She held it for a moment, her back to the rest of the room, her body shielding her actions from everyone but me. She walked the last 2 steps and placed it directly in front of me, her fingers lingering on the stem. "A special glass for the man of the hour," she said, her voice dropping into that fake, caring tone she'd been using for days. "To celebrate your new beginning, Harry." I looked at the empty flute. The crystal was clean, sparkling under the chandeliers. The stage was set. The audience was in place. And the lead actress was ready for her big scene. I felt the small, hard vial in my pocket, the weight of it, both a burden and a promise. I simply nodded, looking up at her with what I hoped was the perfect expression of grateful confusion. "Thank you, dear. You're so kind to your old father-in-law." Madeline picked up the heavy green bottle of Dom Perignon. Her hand, I noted, was perfectly steady now. The anxiety she'd shown earlier had evaporated. This was it. The moment of action. Her nervousness had cooled, hardening into a cold, diamond-sharp focus. She moved around the table, pouring with a practiced, fluid elegance. She filled Cynthia's glass, her mother smiling at hers. She filled Paul's glass. He grunted in acknowledgement, still absorbed by his phone. She smiled warmly at Jim and Robert, my old partners. "Thank you, Madeline, my dear." "Lovely," Robert said, raising his glass slightly. She was the perfect hostess. She laughed, a light, airy sound that sounded completely hollow to me. She filled Leo's glass last, just before mine. I watched my son. He stared at the bubbling liquid as if it were poison. His face was pale, almost gray under the restaurant's warm lights. He looked like a man watching his own executioner sharpen the blade. In a way, he was. Finally, she stood before me. She held the bottle over the glass she had placed in front of me just moments before. But she didn't pour. She paused just for a beat, letting the moment hang in the air. "And this one?" she said, her voice dropping into that saccharine, overly caring tone, is especially for you, Harry. She made a small performance of filling it perhaps a little fuller than the others, as if to show her generosity. She set the bottle down on the white linen and pushed the glass an inch closer to me. For the man of the hour. I smiled my simple, grateful old man smile. It was almost time. The appetizers were being cleared by the staff. The maitre d' was already looking toward the small podium. In 5 minutes, 8 o'clock, I would be called to make my speech. It was now or never. Madeline smiled at me a wide, dazzling smile. And then she made her move. "Oh, goodness!" she exclaimed, her voice suddenly high and flustered. "How clumsy of me!" With a motion that was just a little too deliberate, she accidentally knocked her small, glittering red clutch purse off the edge of the table. It landed on the dark, patterned carpet right by my feet, partially hidden under my chair. "Oh, silly me!" She laughed, a forced, sharp sound. She immediately bent down low, her back to the rest of the room. Her body and the long tablecloth shielded her actions from Cynthia and Paul. My business partners Jim and Robert were deep in a discussion about the stock market, completely oblivious. Leo was staring into the void, lost in his own private hell. No one was watching her. No one except me. I didn't turn to look down at her. I didn't move a muscle. I just lifted my gaze slightly past her to the large, ornate, gilt-framed mirror on the east wall. The mirror that Griffin and I had personally confirmed had a perfect, unobstructed view of our entire table. The mirror that was currently recording everything. And there she was. In the reflection, I saw it all. I saw her hand hidden from the table, not fumbling for her purse, but diving into it. I saw her pull out the small, unlabeled brown vial. Her movements were fast, precise, and economical. She didn't hesitate. She unscrewed the cap with a practiced twist of her fingers, glanced up quickly to confirm everyone was distracted, and then with a sharp, decisive flick of her wrist, she dumped the entire contents, a significant amount of fine white powder, into my champagne flute. The powder hit the bubbles and dissolved almost instantly. A faint, oily swirl on the surface, and then nothing. It was gone. She calmly pocketed the empty vial, grabbed her purse, and straightened up all in one smooth, practiced motion. She emerged from under the table, her face artfully flushed, a perfect picture of slight embarrassment. "Got it," she announced cheerfully to the table. "I'd lose my head if it wasn't attached." She sat back down, and then she looked at me. Her eyes were shining with a sickening, triumphant light. She pushed the poisoned glass, another inch closer to me. "Now where were we?" she said, her voice bright. "Ah, yes, the toast. We really should have a toast before your big speech, Harry." I looked at the glass. My death sentence or so, she thought. All those years. All the love I had tried to show my son. All the sacrifices Clara and I had made. It all came down to this. A spoiled, greedy woman and my weak, spineless son deciding my time was up. Deciding $35 million was worth more than my life, my dignity, my mind. My heart wasn't hammering. It was cold. It was a block of solid ice in my chest. I felt a profound, chilling sadness, but underneath it something else was hardening. Rage. Cold, clean, and purifying. She thought she was setting a trap for a confused old man. She had no idea she had just armed an executioner. Everyone at the table reacted. Cynthia let out an annoyed, "Tut, tut, tut," clearly irritated by the interruption. Her husband Paul sighed as if Madeline's clumsiness was a personal inconvenience. Jim and Robert, my old partners being gentlemen, half rose from their seats, looking down at the floor to see if they could help. Leo, my son, just froze. His eyes were wide, his face pale, his attention glued to the spot on the floor where the purse had landed. Everyone was looking at her, except me. My gaze was fixed forward. I didn't move. I didn't turn my head. My eyes were locked onto the massive, ornate, gilt-framed mirror that dominated the east wall of the restaurant. It was a Baroque monstrosity 10 feet wide, and it reflected our entire table like a silent, brightly lit stage. And in that polished glass I saw the truth. I saw Madeline's crouched form. Her back was to the room, her red dress pooled around her on the carpet. But the mirror captured her profile, and the clumsy, flustered expression she had worn just a second before was completely gone. Her face was a mask of cold, intense concentration. I watched in the reflection as her hand hidden from the table by her own body and the thick linen tablecloth did not fumble for the purse at all. It dove straight into the open clutch. Her fingers emerged not with a lipstick or a compact, but with the small, dark brown vial. The reflection was crystal clear. I saw her quick, sharp glance up at the table. Everyone was still looking down or away. She was safe. With a speed and precision that spoke of careful planning, her fingers twisted the cap. She held the open vial over my glass, which was visible to me in the mirror's angle just below her shoulder. She didn't hesitate for a second. With a sharp, decisive flick of her wrist, she upended the vial. I watched in the mirror as a stream of fine white powder fell from the bottle and hit the surface of my champagne. It didn't bubble. It didn't fizz. It just vanished. There was a faint, oily swirl on the surface of the wine for a single second, and then it was gone. Completely, utterly, untraceably gone. She calmly screwed the cap back onto the now empty vial, slipped it back into her purse, and only then did she actually grab the purse itself. She stood up all in one smooth motion. The mask of flustered embarrassment snapped back onto her face as if it had never left. "Got it!" she announced brightly to the table, holding the red clutch in the air like a trophy. "I'd lose my head if it wasn't attached." She sat down. She looked right at me. Her eyes were shining with a sickening, triumphant light. She had done it. She had poisoned me right in front of 200 people, and no one except me had seen a thing. She sat back down, smoothing the skirt of her red dress. Her face was a perfect mask of innocence, but her eyes, which were fixed on me, were glittering. It was a look of pure reptilian triumph. She had done it. She believed she had won. She leaned forward, raising her voice just enough to be bright and clear, capturing the table's attention. "Now where were we? Ah yes, a toast. We really must toast Harry on his big night." Everyone glasses up. Around the table, people dutifully reached for their flutes. My old partners Jim and Robert smiled warmly, ready to celebrate my retirement. Leo, my son, picked up his glass with a hand that trembled so violently I was surprised he didn't spill it. His knuckles were white. He was staring at the tablecloth as if it held the answers to the universe. He couldn't watch. He was weak. And Cynthia, completely oblivious, looked absolutely thrilled. She loved being at the center of a celebration, even one that wasn't hers. She raised her glass high and her diamonds flashing ready to drink to my demise. Madeline's eyes were locked on me, on my hand, urging me to pick up the poisoned flute. This was the moment. The silence stretched. The entire room seemed to fade away, leaving only our table, a spotlight shining down on this sick, twisted play. My heart wasn't hammering. It was cold. It was a block of solid ice in my chest, a heavy, steady weight. I felt a profound, chilling sadness, but underneath it, something else was hardening by the second. Rage. Cold, clean, and purifying rage. I knew the cameras were rolling. I knew Griffin was watching. I knew the reflection in the mirror was perfect. I stood up slowly, my movements intentionally a little stiff, the way an old man should move. "Wait," I said. My voice was calm but firm enough to cut through the anticipation. Everyone paused. Their glasses hovered in the air. Madeline's smile faltered, a tiny, almost invisible flicker of panic in her eyes. "What is he doing?" This wasn't part of the plan. "Please, everyone, just one moment," I said, waving my hand graciously. I turned my attention, my full attention, away from Madeline, away from Leo. I turned it entirely onto Cynthia. I smiled at her, a warm, almost deferential smile, the smile of a simple, grateful man. "Cynthia," I said, my voice filled with a fake, profound respect. "Amidst all this wonderful celebration, I realize I haven't had a proper chance to greet you, to truly thank you." Cynthia blinked, visibly surprised and intensely flattered to suddenly be the center of attention. She preened, a small, pleased smile playing on her lips as she touched her diamond necklace. "Oh, why, Harry, how very sweet of you." "No, I mean it," I said, and then I reached down and picked up my glass. The poisoned glass. I held the poisoned flute in my hand. The crystal felt cool against my skin. Across the table, Madeline was watching me, her smile fixed, her eyes bright with a sick, victorious light. She was waiting for the old fool to drink his medicine. I stood up slowly, my movements intentionally a little stiff, the way a man my age is expected to move. "Wait," I said. My voice was calm, but it cut through the table's chatter. Everyone paused. Their glasses hovered in the air. Madeline's smile faltered. A tiny, almost invisible flicker of panic crossed her face. "What is he doing?" This wasn't part of the plan. "Please, everyone, just one moment," I said, waving my hand graciously. I turned my full attention away from Madeline, away from my son, and focused it entirely on Cynthia. I beamed at her, a warm, almost deferential smile, the smile of a simple, grateful man. "Cynthia," I said, my voice filled with a fake, profound respect. "Amidst all this wonderful celebration, I realize I haven't had a proper chance to greet you, to truly thank you for the incredible woman you raised, for giving me such a special daughter-in-law." Cynthia, just as I predicted, lit up like a Christmas tree. She positively preened, a small, pleased smile playing on her lips as she touched her diamond necklace. "Oh, why, Harry," she purred. "How very sweet of you." "No, I mean it," I said. I picked up my flute, the poisoned flute, and began to walk slowly around the table, approaching her. I was just given this glass, the first pour, as the man of the hour. But I feel that's wrong. The real guest of honor, the person who made this wonderful family connection possible, is you. I was standing beside her chair now. She was looking up at me, her face glowing with flattered pride. "My glass is just a glass," I continued. "But this glass, this one was meant for the speech." I held it up. "Please, as a sign of my utmost respect, I want you to have it." And with a steady hand, I placed the poisoned champagne flute directly in front of her. Then I gently reached over and picked up her untouched, perfectly clean glass from its coaster. The reaction was immediate. Madeline's smile didn't just falter, it shattered. She shot up from her chair, knocking it backward onto the carpet with a loud thud. "No!" she shrieked. Her voice was so loud, the string quartet momentarily stopped playing. Every head in the restaurant turned toward us. "Dad, wait, that glass. That's your glass. It's special." She stammered, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. She was desperately searching for a reason, an excuse, anything to stop what was about to happen. I glanced at Leo. He looked like he had stopped breathing. He was a statue of pale, sweaty fear, his eyes wide, watching his wife try to stop a train wreck she herself had set in motion. But Cynthia was completely oblivious. She was annoyed by her daughter's outburst and absolutely delighted by my gesture. She let out a high, tinkling laugh. "Oh, Madeline, don't be so dramatic," she snapped, waving a dismissive diamond-covered hand at her daughter. "What has gotten into you?" "Sit down. You're making a scene." She turned back to me, her eyes sparkling with self-satisfaction. "Oh, Harry, you are just an old-fashioned gentleman, aren't you? How perfectly charming. I accept." And before Madeline could scream again, Cynthia's ringed fingers closed around the stem of the poisoned glass. "Mom, please don't," Madeline whispered, a last desperate hiss. I think your glass was... it was better. It had more bubbles. It was pathetic. It was useless. It was too late. Cynthia was already in her element. She loved the attention. She loved the drama of the toast. She raised the glass high, her diamonds flashing, making sure everyone at the table, everyone in the restaurant saw her being honored. "Well then," she announced, her voice booming across the silent room. "To Harry, to retirement. And," she looked at me with a coy smile, "to new beginnings." And she tilted her head back and drank. She didn't sip. She was a show-off. She drained nearly the entire glass in one long, continuous, self-satisfied swallow. I watched the level of the champagne drop. I watched the poison disappear down her throat. My hand was perfectly steady. I raised her glass, the clean one, to my lips. "To new beginnings, Cynthia," I said. And I took a small, symbolic sip. The toast was over. Cynthia set her now empty flute down on the white linen with a satisfied, almost theatrical thud. She was beaming, energized by the attention, her face flushed with pride. Across the table, Madeline looked like she had just watched someone step in front of a speeding train. Her mouth was slightly open, her face a pale, bloodless mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She stared at her mother, her eyes wide, unable to process what she had just witnessed. Leo was even worse. He was a statue of ice, his hand still frozen around the stem of his own champagne glass, which he hadn't touched. He was just staring at the centerpiece, a man who had completely checked out of his own body. "Well," Cynthia boomed, oblivious, "that was just lovely, Harry. Now let's have some of these delicious appetizers, I'm starving." As if on cue, the team of silent, efficient waiters descended on our table. They placed down small, exquisite plates. I saw a tiny lobster bisque in a porcelain cup, a single seared scallop in a bright saffron sauce, and a micro salad that looked like it had been assembled with tweezers. I picked up my spoon, my hand perfectly steady, and took a sip of my bisque. It was excellent. I was perfectly calm. I was simply waiting. I had done my research on the compound I suspected was in that vial. When mixed with a large amount of alcohol consumed so quickly, its full effects would take approximately 10 to 15 minutes to manifest. Cynthia was in her element. She took a delicate bite of her scallop. "Oh, divine," she announced to the table. "Paul, you simply must try this. It's perfection. It just melts in your mouth." She was still fine, still in control, still the star of her own show. I glanced at Madeline. She wasn't eating. She had picked up her bread roll and was systematically shredding it into a pile of tiny crumbs on her side plate. Her eyes, wide and panicked, darted from her mother's face to my face and then back to her mother. She was waiting. She was waiting for the show she had produced to begin, terrified to discover she had cast the wrong lead actress. She looked at me with a sudden, sharp, clarifying hatred. She knew. She knew I had done this. She just didn't know why. I caught her eye and gave her a small, confused smile. The senile old man smile. It made her clench her jaw so hard I could see the muscle jump. 7:55 p.m. The waiters began to clear the appetizer plates. The restaurant was buzzing. Cynthia was now holding court, regaling Jim and Robert with a long, excruciatingly boring story about her recent trip to Milan. "And the leather, my God," she drawled. "You simply cannot find quality like that in the States. I told Paul we are buying the entire collection." She was loud. She was arrogant. She was perfectly, blissfully unaware that a chemical firestorm was about to ignite inside her brain. 7:58 p.m. Madeline's leg was bouncing under the table so hard I could feel the vibration through the floor. Leo had his eyes squeezed shut, as if he was in intense physical pain. I, on the other hand, was calmly reviewing my speech. I had the notes on cards in my breast pocket, but I didn't need them. I knew every word by heart. I was going to talk about Clara. I was going to talk about the foundation. I was going to talk about the $35 million. The timing had to be absolutely perfect. 8 o'clock, on the dot. As if summoned by an invisible bell, the maitre d' Charles materialized at my side. He leaned down, his voice a respectful, discreet murmur. "Mr. Blackwood, we are ready for you at the podium whenever you are, sir." I nodded slowly, pushing my chair back. "Thank you, Charles." I gathered my prop note cards. I stood up, feeling the eyes of the table on me. And just as I turned to walk toward the stage, I heard it. The sound that I had been waiting for. Cynthia, who had been in the middle of a sentence, suddenly stopped. And so I told him," she said. Her voice slurred just slightly, catching on the word told. She blinked a long, slow-motion blink. She shook her head, a quick, violent gesture, as if trying to clear water from her ears. "I told him, She looked down at her plate. The walls. Paul, is it hot in here? The lights are so bright." Madeline froze her hand halfway to her water glass. It was beginning. "I need some air," Cynthia announced. She grabbed the edge of the table and tried to push herself up. It was a disaster. Her coordination was gone. She lunged forward, her body lurching sideways. She was a puppet whose strings had just been cut. "Cynthia, sit down," Paul hissed, embarrassed. But she was already in motion. She stumbled directly into the path of a young waiter who was balancing a heavy silver tray of empty appetizer plates. The collision was spectacular. Cynthia crashed into him, her diamond necklace catching on his white uniform. The waiter cried out, staggering backward as he tried to save the tray. He failed. The heavy silver tray hit the marble floor with an explosive crash that echoed through the entire restaurant. Plates shattered. Silverware skittered across the floor. The string quartet stopped playing. Every single diner in the Crest, 200 people, turned to look. The young waiter was on his knees, stunned, surrounded by broken porcelain. Cynthia was standing over him, swaying her hair coming undone from its perfect bun, and then she started to scream. What are you doing?" she shrieked at the poor waiter. Her voice was no longer a sophisticated drawl. It was a low, guttural slur. The waiter looked up, terrified. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry you ran into me. Liar!" Cynthia screamed. She pointed a trembling, diamond-covered finger at him. You were trying to steal from me." Paul buried his face in his hands. "Oh, God." Cynthia, shut up. "He's a waiter." He was after my fork," she insisted, her voice rising in hysteria. "I saw him. He grabbed my special fork." People were starting to stand up from their tables, whispering, pointing. I saw a few phones come out, discreetly recording. This was beautiful. This was poetic. This was exactly the scene Madeline had planned for me. The public breakdown, the paranoid accusations, the total loss of dignity. "Ma'am, please, let's get you sat down," Jim, my partner, said, standing up and trying to be a gentleman. Cynthia spun on him. Get away from me, all of you. Why are you all staring at me?" She was breathing heavily, her eyes wide and wild. "Cynthia, for God's sake, you're drunk," Paul hissed, finally getting up and grabbing her arm. "Sit down now. You're embarrassing me." Cynthia turned to her husband. She stared at him for a long, terrible second, as if she had never seen him before. She tilted her head, and then she screamed. It was not a human sound. It was a raw, terrified shriek. "Who are you?" she bellowed, ripping her arm from his grasp. "Get away from me, your eyes! Your eyes! They're devil eyes, get him away!" She scrambled backward, crashing into the table, her face a mask of pure, chemical-induced terror. And that's when I looked at Madeline. She was frozen. Her face was the color of chalk. She was staring at her mother, who was now cowering against a pillar, screaming about devils and thieves. I looked at Leo, my son. His mouth was hanging open, and a single silent tear was rolling down his cheek. He was watching his mother-in-law live out the exact humiliating nightmare they had scripted for me. They had wanted to destroy my credibility. They had wanted to prove I was senile. They had wanted to have me committed. And I, Harrison Blackwood, the confused old fool, had just served their own poison back to them on a silver platter in front of 200 of the most influential people in the city. Madeline's eyes finally tore away from her mother's screaming form and locked onto mine. Her expression was no longer one of triumph. It was a new, dawning, sickening understanding. She knew. She knew that I knew. She knew that I had switched the glasses. The maitre d' was rushing over. "Mr. Blackwood, my apologies. We're calling security and an ambulance." I just nodded calmly. "Thank you, Charles. I believe that would be best. It seems my daughter-in-law's mother is unwell." The flashing red and blue lights of the ambulance strobed through the restaurant's tall windows, painting the shocked faces of the guests in garish alternating colors. The sound of a wailing siren growing closer and then stopping abruptly outside was the only thing that broke the stunned silence Cynthia had left behind. Two paramedics wheeled a gurney through the main doors, their expressions all business, completely unfazed by the opulence and the drama. They moved directly to where Cynthia was now slumped against the pillar, her husband Paul trying uselessly to cover her with a linen napkin as she muttered about silver forks and devil eyes. She was strapped to the gurney, a pathetic, disheveled heap of sequins and diamonds. She was still muttering, but the fight had gone out of her. The drug was taking its full effect, now pulling her down into a confused, incoherent fog. Madeline and Paul followed the gurney out. Paul's face was a mottled red, his eyes darting around, avoiding the gaze of the 200 people watching him. But Madeline was a different story. As they pushed the gurney past our table, she stopped for 1 second. She turned her head and her eyes wide and wild with a mixture of hatred and sheer terror locked onto mine. It was a silent declaration of war. She didn't say a word. She just looked at me, and in that look I saw her realization. She knew I had done this, and she knew I had done it on purpose. Then she turned and ran after the gurney, her red dress disappearing into the flashing lights outside. I looked at my table. My partners Jim and Robert were looking at me with deep concern. "Harry, what on earth just happened?" Jim asked, his voice low. And then I looked at my son. Leo was still sitting there. He hadn't moved. He was as white as the tablecloth, his face drained of all color, his eyes fixed on the half-eaten bread roll on his plate. He hadn't followed his wife. He hadn't followed his mother-in-law. He was paralyzed. A ghost in an expensive suit, trapped between the wife who had just been exposed and the father he had tried to destroy. The maitre d' Charles was at my side again, his face pale with stress. "Mr. Blackwood. The podium. Your speech." He stammered clearly, desperate to restore some order to his ruined evening. "Of course, Charles," I said calmly. I put my napkin down, adjusted the cheap polyester tie Madeline had bought me, and walked toward the small stage. Every step was silent. The entire restaurant watched me. They were expecting an explanation. They were expecting me to be shaken, confused, perhaps even senile, just as Cynthia had appeared. I stepped up to the microphone. I looked out at the 200 shocked faces. "My dear friends," I began, my voice steady, clear, and full of a warmth I did not feel. "My apologies for that interruption." I gave them a small, reassuring smile. "It seems my daughter-in-law's mother, Cynthia, has had an unfortunate medical reaction to something. I'm sure she'll be perfectly fine once the doctors take a look at her." I let that sink in. I didn't blame the restaurant. I didn't blame the champagne. I called it what it was, her reaction. "But," I continued, "this is a party, a celebration. I invited you all here tonight to share in my joy, and I won't let a small medical incident spoil this wonderful evening." I raised my clean glass of champagne, the one I had taken from Cynthia. Please enjoy the wonderful food, enjoy the music, and enjoy each other's company. The bar is open and the main course will be served shortly. Let's continue our celebration. I nodded to the string quartet, who after a moment of stunned hesitation, quickly began to play again. I stepped down from the podium. I had not mentioned my retirement. I had not mentioned the $35 million. I had not mentioned the foundation. I kept all my secrets. I held all my power. The trap had been sprung, but the hunt was not over. I returned to my table, sat down, and looked at my son, who still hadn't moved his face, a mask of pure, unadulterated dread. I gave Leo a long, hard look. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was a cornered animal, too terrified to fight, too weak to run. The music swelled, and the nervous chatter in the restaurant slowly returned, people forcing themselves to forget what they had just seen, eager to return to their expensive dinners. I picked up my napkin and dabbed my lips, my hand perfectly steady. "Excuse me," I murmured to Jim and Robert. "I'm afraid all that excitement, I need to use the restroom." "Of course, Harry," Jim said, his face a mask of concern. "Are you all right?" "That was shocking." "Just need to splash some water on my face, Jim," I replied, giving him a weak, shaky smile. "It's all a bit much for an old man." I stood up and walked not too fast toward the back of the restaurant. I could feel Leo's eyes on my back, but I didn't turn around. I pushed open the heavy mahogany door to the men's room. It was empty, a cavern of marble and polished brass, the quiet hum of the ventilation fan covering all sound. I locked the main door. I pulled out my phone. It was a simple old-model smartphone, nothing flashy, the kind of phone a retired man would use. I hit the number 1 on my speed dial. Griffin answered on the first ring. His voice was all business. "Talk to me, Harry. We're watching the live feed. It's chaos." I stood in front of the mirror looking at my own reflection. The old suit, the cheap tie, the tired eyes. It was a perfect disguise. "They took the bait, Griffin," I said, my voice low, cold, and stripped of all feigned weakness. The old man was gone. The CEO was back. Madeline dosed the glass. I saw it. The camera on the mirror did it get the shot. "We got it." Griffin's voice was grim. "Crystal clear. Her, the vial, the powder, the whole thing. It's undeniable. What now? The ambulance just took Cynthia away. They're heading to Mercy General." "I know," I said. "And that's where we execute Plan B." Madeline and her useless father followed the ambulance. Leo is still at the table, frozen. He's terrified. He's weak. He's compromised. "What do you need?" Griffin asked. "I need you at Mercy General now. I'll head there in 5 minutes. I'll give Leo just enough time to panic and call Madeline. I want them both there when I arrive." "What about the police, Harry? Now's the time. We have the video evidence. We can have her arrested for attempted assault." "No," I said firmly. "Not yet. An arrest is too clean. It's too simple. They wanted to destroy my mind, my reputation. They wanted to paint me as senile. I want to give them exactly what they planned. I want to turn their own script against them." I could hear Griffin smiling on the other end. "You're a cruel bastard, Harry." "I'm a thorough one," I corrected him. "Get to the hospital. Bring the video evidence on a tablet. And yes, bring the police. But not to make an arrest. I want 2 uniformed officers off duty if you have to, but in uniform. I want them standing with you. I want them to look official. I want my family to walk into a legal brick wall." "Understood. We'll be in the waiting room in 20 minutes, Griffin said. "Good." I paused, then added one last instruction. "And Griffin, call the hospital's legal department. Tell them who you are. Tell them a high-profile patient is inbound and you represent her potential assailant's family. I want them to be nervous. I want them to be cooperative." "Consider it done," he said. I hung up. I looked in the mirror one last time. I splashed some cold water on my face, ruffled my hair just a bit, and loosened my cheap tie. I took a deep breath, letting the mask of the confused, frail old man settle back over my features. I unlocked the door and walked back out into the restaurant. Time to go see my son. I walked out of the Crest, leaving the murmur of 200 confused guests behind me. I didn't rush. I got into my old, reliable Lincoln Town Car, a 20-year-old vehicle they all despised, and drove slowly, obeying every speed limit. I needed them to get to the hospital first. I needed them to be steeped in their own panic. Mercy General's emergency room was the opposite of the Crest. It was brutally bright, smelled of antiseptic and burnt coffee, and the only music was the steady, anxious beep of monitors and the sound of someone crying softly in the corner. And there they were. Under the harsh fluorescent lights in the plastic-chaired waiting area sat my family. Leo was pacing. He had torn off his suit jacket and ripped his tie loose. He was running his hands through his hair, his face pale and slick with sweat. He looked like a man who had just lost everything. Madeline was sitting perfectly still. She wasn't pacing. She was rigid, her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists in the lap of her expensive red dress. Her face was a mask of pure, concentrated fury. She was staring at the double doors of the trauma care unit as if she could burn them down with her eyes. Leo saw me first. "Dad!" he yelped, rushing over to me. His voice was a high, panicked whisper. "Oh my God, Dad, it's awful. It's Cynthia." I widened my eyes, playing the part of the confused old man perfectly. "Cynthia, what happened? Was it the food? Is she all right?" They don't know." Leo stammered, his words tumbling over each other. He was desperate. He was looking at me, begging me to be the old fool, the man who couldn't possibly understand what was happening. "The doctor just came out. He said it's acute poisoning. Or maybe a stroke. They're running tests. They're pumping her stomach. Oh God, Dad, her heart keeps skipping beats." He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in. What if she dies?" He was terrified, but not for his mother-in-law. He was terrified for himself. "Poisoning?" I asked, my voice shaking just the right amount. "But how we all ate the same food? I don't understand." And that's when Madeline moved. She had been watching us coiled like a snake. My feigned confusion, my old man act was the final insult. It was the one thing she couldn't stand. She shot up from her chair and marched toward me, her heels clicking like gunshots on the linoleum floor. "Stop it!" she hissed, her voice low and trembling with rage. Leo froze. "Madeline, what?" "I said, stop it!" she shrieked, her voice echoing through the waiting room. The woman in the corner stopped crying. The triage nurse looked up from her computer. Madeline was standing right in front of me now, her face inches from mine. Her beautiful features were twisted into a mask of pure primal hatred. The polite, sophisticated veneer was gone. This was the real Madeline. "You," she whispered, her voice shaking. "This was you." I shrank back, clutching my chest. "Madeline, dear, what are you talking about? You're scaring me. Don't!" she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "Don't you dare play the confused old man with me. Not now. I saw you. You did this." Leo tried to grab her arm. "Maddie, please, you're upset. The doctor said." She ripped her arm away from him. "He's lying, Leo. Don't you see it? Look at him. He's not confused. He's not senile. He's a monster." She turned back to me, her voice rising with every word, drawing the attention of everyone in the ER. You knew I put the powder in your glass. You knew what it would do, and you watched me. You let me. Mad. And then you switched them." She screamed, the accusation hanging in the sterile air. "You switched the glasses. You gave my mother the poison." That was meant for you. You tried to kill her." A few people in the waiting room gasped. The security guard near the door was now watching us intently. "Madeline," I said, my voice trembling with what they would all assume was fear. "My dear, I think you're in shock. I would never—" "Poison what? What poison? I was just being polite. A toast. It was just a toast." My apparent confusion, my pathetic stammering denial was like throwing gasoline on her fire. It was the ultimate insult. I was denying her the one thing she had, her intelligence. I was treating her like she was the crazy one. "You bastard!" she shrieked, and she lunged at me. She raised her hand to slap me, but Leo, finally reacting, caught her wrist in midair. "Madeline, stop. You're making it worse. Everyone is looking." "I don't care who's looking," she sobbed, struggling against his grip, her composure completely shattered. "He did this. He poisoned my mother. He's a murderer, and he's standing right there pretending to be a frail old man. I want him arrested. Arrest him. Arrest him." She was hysterical. She was sobbing, screaming, accusing me of the very crime she had just attempted to commit. It was perfect. It was everything I had hoped for, and right on cue as Madeline was reaching the peak of her frantic public confession. The double doors of the emergency room slid open. "Mr. Blackwood," a calm, authoritative voice called out. I turned. There was Griffin, my lawyer, looking immaculate in a dark suit, and standing right beside him in full crisp uniforms were two city police officers. They were not smiling. Griffin's arrival was perfectly timed. The double doors of the emergency room hissed open, and the three men walked in. Not with the frantic energy of a hospital, but with the slow, deliberate pace of men who were in complete control. The waiting room went silent. The woman who had been crying in the corner stopped. The triage nurse looked up, her eyes wide. Even the security guard who had been watching us instinctively straightened his posture. It was the uniforms. Two full, crisp blue police uniforms, complete with duty belts, standing on either side of a man in a flawless $1,000 suit. Madeline and Leo froze. The hysteria on Madeline's face was instantly replaced by a flash of stunned confusion, which then quickly morphed into something else: calculation. Hope. She saw the police officers, and in her panicked, drugged-up, and arrogant mind, she saw her solution. She thought they were here for me. She thought this was her chance to seize control of the narrative, to paint me as the villain before I could speak. She let go of Leo's arm and took a staggering step toward the officers. One hand raised, her finger pointing directly at my chest. Her voice was a hysterical shriek that echoed off the sterile tile walls. "Officers, thank God. Thank God you are here. You have to arrest him. Arrest that man." The two officers, two young men who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, just stared at her. They didn't move. They were Griffin's men, just as I'd requested. They were here for show, and they were playing their parts perfectly. "Ma'am," one of them said, his voice a bored, professional monotone. "Him!" Madeline screamed, jabbing her finger at me. "My father-in-law, Harrison Blackwood. He poisoned my mother. He tried to kill her. She's in there right now dying. And he did it." I shrank back. I put my hands up, my body trembling, my eyes wide with what I hoped looked like pure, senile terror. I leaned on Leo, who was so paralyzed he was barely standing. "Poison," I stammered, my voice cracking. "Officers, I don't understand." "Madeline, my dear, what are you saying? We were at a party. Your mother, she got sick. She was confused." I turned my wide, innocent, terrified old man eyes to the officers. "Please, officers, I think she's in shock. She's not well. She's saying terrible, terrible things. She's delirious." My apparent confusion, my pathetic, stammering denial was like throwing gasoline on her fire. It was the ultimate insult. I was denying her the one thing she had, her intelligence. I was treating her like she was the crazy one. "You bastard!" she shrieked, and she lunged at me again. This time the two officers moved, blocking her path, each placing a firm hand on her shoulders. "Ma'am, you need to calm down. Now." "I won't calm down," she sobbed, struggling against their grip, her composure completely shattered. "Don't you understand? He did this. He poisoned my mother. He's a murderer, and he's standing right there pretending to be a frail old man. I want him arrested. Arrest him. Arrest him." She was hysterical. She was sobbing, screaming, accusing me of the very crime she had just attempted to commit. It was perfect. It was everything I had hoped for, and right on cue as Madeline was reaching the peak of her frantic public confession, Griffin stepped forward. He raised one calm, authoritative hand. "Officers, if I may, thank you for your assistance." He turned his cold, calculating gaze on Madeline. She was still heaving, her chest rising and falling, her eyes red and wild. "Mrs. Blackwood," Griffin said. His voice was not loud, but it was so sharp, so precise that it cut through her sobs and silenced the entire room. "My name is Mr. Griffin. I am Mr. Harrison Blackwood's attorney." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You have just made several very serious, very public accusations against my client. You have accused him in front of multiple witnesses and two officers of the law of attempted murder. Are you absolutely sure you want to stand by that statement?" Madeline's eyes darted from Griffin to the officers and then back to me. She was trapped. She had committed. She had to double down. "Yes," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "I stand by it. He's senile. He's dangerous. I saw him. He switched the glasses. He poisoned my mother." "Switched the glasses," Griffin repeated slowly, nodding as if taking a mental note. "Senile. Dangerous. Got it." He looked at Leo, who was now pressed against the wall, trying to become invisible. "And you, Mr. Blackwood, do you support your wife's accusation?" Leo just stared, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, making no sound. "I see," Griffin said. He turned back to Madeline, who was still breathing heavily, her eyes still locked on him. "Well, Mrs. Blackwood," Griffin said, a thin, cold smile playing on his lips, "that is fascinating. Because, you see, we have a slightly different version of events." He slowly reached into his expensive leather briefcase. "And the wonderful thing about a restaurant like the Crest," he said, as he pulled out a slim, dark tablet, "is that they are very particular about their security." He held up the tablet. "We have video." Madeline was still struggling against the officer's firm grip, her face blotchy and red, her hair half undone. "Arrest him," she sobbed, twisting to look at the nurse behind the desk. "Are you all deaf? He's a murderer. He poisoned my mother." Griffin stepped forward, moving smoothly between me and Madeline. His presence was a solid wall of expensive wool and absolute authority. His voice was not loud, but it was so sharp, so precise that it cut through her sobs and silenced the entire room. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said. Madeline froze. "My name is Mr. Griffin. I am Mr. Harrison Blackwood's attorney." He paused, letting the words hang in the sterile air, letting their weight settle on her. "You have just made several very serious, very public accusations against my client. You have accused him in front of multiple witnesses and two officers of the law of attempted murder. Are you absolutely sure you want to stand by that statement?" Madeline's eyes darted from Griffin's cold face to the impassive officers and then back to me. She was trapped. She had committed. She had to double down. "Yes," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "I stand by it. He's senile. He's dangerous. I saw him. He switched the glasses. He poisoned my mother." "Switched the glasses," Griffin repeated slowly, nodding, as if taking a mental note. "Senile. Dangerous. Got it." He looked at Leo, who was now pressed so hard against the no-smoking sign he was practically merging with the wall. "And you, Mr. Blackwood, Do you support your wife's accusation? Leo just stared, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, making no sound. I see, Griffin said. This was my cue. I had been cowering behind Leo, my hands visibly trembling, the perfect picture of a terrified, confused old man. But now I stopped. I slowly straightened my back. I let the trembling in my hands cease. I lowered my arms to my sides. I took one step forward, away from the protection of my son and into the center of the fluorescent-lit floor. I looked directly at Madeline. The old man was gone. The CEO was back. My voice was no longer the weak, reedy whisper I had been using. It was strong. It was cold. And it was loud enough for every nurse, every patient, and every cop in that room to hear me perfectly clearly. Sue me, I asked. Madeline stopped breathing. Her eyes widened. This was not the voice she was expecting. You want to sue me, I repeated, taking another step closer to her. You want to accuse me of poisoning? I let the question hang in the air. I looked at the officers. I looked at Griffin. Then my gaze settled back on my daughter-in-law, who was now staring at me with a new dawning horror. Madeline, I said, my voice dropping into a cold, conversational tone. Are you by any chance talking about the tranquilizer? The one in the small, unlabeled brown vial? The one you yourself slipped into my champagne glass at 7:53 p.m., right after you accidentally dropped your purse. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier and more profound than any noise I had ever heard. Leo made a small gasping sound like a man being strangled. Madeline's face, which had been red with rage, instantly drained of all color. She went from red to a sick, chalky white. I... She stammered, her mind visibly racing, trying to find an escape. I don't know what you're talking about, don't you? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Because I do. And the security cameras at the crest do too. Leo and Madeline just froze. The absolute blood-draining shock on their faces was more satisfying than any applause. Leo let out a small, strangled gasp, as if he'd been punched in the gut. He physically staggered back, his hand flying to his mouth. Dad! What are you talking about? He stammered, his eyes wide with a terror so pure it was almost childlike. He was still clinging to the hope that this was all a terrible, confusing misunderstanding. But Madeline was different. She was a processor. I could see the wheels spinning behind her eyes, her mind racing, calculating, trying to find a way out of the box I had just built around her. She wasn't just scared. She was furious. She was furious that the old fool had outsmarted her. You're lying, she hissed, her voice dropping from a shriek to a venomous whisper. There are no cameras. I checked the angles. There was nothing. She had checked the angles. She admitted it. Right there. You're bluffing, she snarled, trying to regain control. He's bluffing. He's paranoid. Officers, can't you see? This is exactly what I was talking about. He's having an episode. He's delusional. He's making up stories about cameras and poison. He's the one who's sick. He's the one who needs to be committed. She was loud again, playing to the room, to the nurses, to the security guard, who was now watching with his hand on his radio. She was trying to build her case for my senility, right here, right now, using my own accusation as proof of my instability. It was a brilliant, desperate move, but it was too late. That's quite enough, Mrs. Blackwood. The voice was not mine. It was new. It was cold, sharp, and carried an authority that silenced the entire waiting room. Griffin stepped forward. He had been standing back by the doors, a silent observer. Now he moved into the center of our little drama, the two uniformed police officers flanking him like stone statues. He moved with a slow, deliberate confidence, his expensive shoes clicking on the linoleum floor. He stopped directly in front of Madeline. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, nodding to Leo, who looked like he was about to faint. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, his gaze settling on Madeline. She was still breathing heavily, her chest heaving, her eyes narrowed at this new threat. "My name is Mr. Griffin," he said, his voice as smooth and hard as marble. "I am Mr. Harrison Blackwood's legal counsel." He let the words hang in the air, letting their weight settle on her. "You have just in front of multiple witnesses and 2 officers of the law," he continued, gesturing to the men beside him, "accused my client of attempted murder. You have also very publicly claimed that he is senile, delusional, paranoid, and dangerous. Am I summarizing your position correctly?" Madeline was trapped. She looked at the officers, then at Griffin, then at me. She had committed. She had to double down. "Yes," she said, her voice cracking but still defiant. "It's the truth. He's a danger to himself and everyone else. He poisoned my mother. He needs to be stopped." "Fascinating," Griffin said. He didn't even blink. "Because we seem to have a slightly different version of events." He slowly, almost casually reached into his polished leather briefcase. He pulled out a slim, dark tablet. "You see, Mrs. Blackwood, the wonderful thing about a restaurant like the Crest," he said, his voice dropping into a cold, conversational tone, "is that they are very particular about their security." He held up the tablet, the screen dark. "You mentioned cameras. You mentioned poison. You mentioned switching glasses." He tapped the screen. It lit up, showing the time-stamped interface of a security feed. "I believe," he said, holding the tablet up for Leo, for the officers to see, "this is the video you were all discussing." Griffin tapped the screen. The video feed was sharp, high definition, and perfectly framed. The angle was from high on the east wall, just as I had requested. It captured our entire table clear as day, centered by the ornate gilt mirror that reflected every face. "The security team at the Crest was extremely cooperative," Griffin said, his voice a calm monotone. "This is from camera 4 time-stamped at 7:52 p.m., just a few minutes ago. Please watch closely." He angled the tablet so Madeline and the 2 officers had a perfect view. On the screen, we all watched the scene unfold again. We saw Madeline, bright and smiling, accidentally knock her red purse to the floor. We saw her bend down her back to the room. But in the mirror's reflection, her face was not flustered. It was cold, focused, and ugly with concentration. We watched her hand dip into the purse. We watched her pull out the small, dark vial. We watched her unscrew the cap, glance up, and then with a sharp, decisive flick, dump the white powder into the champagne glass in front of me. The officers' expressions hardened. One of them instinctively put his hand on his belt. Madeline's breath hitched. A small, strangled sound escaped her throat. That's... It's been edited. That's fake. That's not..." "It gets better, Mrs. Blackwood," Griffin said, not taking his eyes off her. The video continued. We watched her stand up, her face instantly transforming back into the bright, cheerful hostess. We watched her urge everyone to toast. And then we watched me. We watched me stand up, walk over to Cynthia, and speak. The video was silent, but the actions were undeniable. We watched me offer my poisoned glass. We watched Cynthia, beaming with pride, accept it. We watched me take her clean glass. And then we watched Cynthia drain the flute in one long, self-satisfied swallow. The video feed ended. Griffin pressed pause on the still image of Cynthia, her head tilted back, drinking the poison meant for me. The silence in the emergency room was absolute. It was so quiet, I could hear the high-pitched electronic hum of the heart monitor down the hall. Madeline just stared at the screen. Her mind, which had been racing, simply stopped. The blood drained from her face, leaving her a ghastly, chalky white. Her knees buckled. She didn't faint. She just collapsed. She folded in on herself, her expensive red dress crumpling, as she sank into one of the hard plastic waiting room chairs, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with the catastrophic realization of her failure. Leo finally spoke. His voice was a thin, pathetic whisper, a child's plea in the face of an undeniable truth. "No," he stammered, shaking his head. His eyes squeezed shut, as if that could make it all go away. No, you don't understand. That was just vitamins." He looked desperately at the officers at Griffin at me. "It was just vitamins. For his health, Madeline. She was just trying to help him. It was just vitamins." The next morning, the fluorescent chaos of the emergency room was replaced by the oppressive, silent luxury of Griffin's office. We were on the 50th floor, high above the city, surrounded by dark, mahogany, leather-bound books and a panoramic window that showcased the skyline like a painting. It was a room built for power, and the air was thick with it. Madeline and Leo sat on a low, impossibly expensive leather sofa opposite Griffin's massive desk. They looked small, defeated. Madeline was wearing the same red dress from the night before. It was wrinkled now, stained with what looked like coffee, and it hung on her like a costume from a play that had ended disastrously. She had been processed, questioned, and released on bail. My bail. I had posted it at 3 a.m. An act of good faith, I'd had Griffin tell the police. An act that ensured she had to be here this morning. She was staring at her hands, her face pale and puffy, her eyes red-rimmed and empty of all their previous fire. Leo sat beside her, but a foot of empty cushion separated them. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a year. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face was gray, and he couldn't stop a small, continuous tremor in his right hand. He just stared at the floor, a broken, hollowed-out shell of a man. I sat in a heavy armchair next to Griffin's desk, sipping a hot black coffee. I had slept perfectly. Griffin, as always, was immaculate. He placed a single thin file on the polished wood between us. The sound was like a gavel striking. "Good morning," Griffin said. His voice was pleasant, but it held the cold finality of a judge. "I'm glad we could all meet. I spoke with the hospital. Cynthia is stable. The doctors have flushed the toxins from her system, and she is conscious. She is, however, currently in police custody for disorderly conduct and assaulting a waiter. They will be questioning her about the events of last night as soon as she is coherent." Madeline flinched, but said nothing. "And Madeline," Griffin continued, "your bail was set at $50,000, which Mr. Blackwood graciously posted. He did not do this out of kindness. He did this so you would be present for this meeting. Had you remained in a holding cell, you would have forfeited your right to be here." Leo finally looked up, his eyes dull. What meeting? What is this, Mom?" "This, Griffin said, is where we discuss the consequences." Griffin slid the thin file folder across the polished mahogany desk. It stopped perfectly in the center, equidistant between me and them. "This," he began, his voice calm, "is the preliminary case file." He tented his fingers. "Madeline, as of last night, you are facing a raft of potential criminal charges. Let's start with the most serious. Reckless endangerment, administration of a noxious substance, assault with intent to do great bodily harm, and given the potential lethal interaction of that dose with alcohol, a good prosecutor might even be able to argue for attempted murder. But let's be conservative." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "Let's just call it aggravated assault on a person over 65. In this state, that's a Class B felony. And given the premeditation which we can prove and the public nature of the act, you are looking at a minimum prison sentence of 10 years. With good behavior, you might get out in 15. Madeline's head snapped up. Her eyes, which had been dead and red-rimmed, were now wide with a fresh, sharp terror. "Prison," she whispered. The word was a puff of air. No. It was a mistake. A joke. A prank. It was just vitamins. Griffin didn't smile. He was a surgeon, and this was the incision. Vitamins, he repeated, raising an eyebrow. Is that what you'll tell the jury? Because the hospital has already drawn Cynthia's blood. The toxicology report will be back within hours. It will show a massive near-lethal dose of a restricted-class benzodiazepine mixed with alcohol. We've already had a pharmacist review the likely dosage. It was enough to induce respiratory failure in a man my client's size. You weren't trying to make him look senile, Mrs. Blackwood. You were rolling the dice on his life. No, she shrieked, her voice cracking. I didn't know. I just wanted him to be quiet. I just wanted him to stop, so we could help him. Help him, Griffin said, his voice flat. Help him by drugging him in front of 200 people. A bold strategy, and one you confessed to quite loudly in the emergency room. He tapped the folder. We have the signed statements of both officers who witnessed your confession, and of course the nurse and the security guard. He paused, letting the weight of the evidence settle on them. And then he continued. There is the other evidence. He swiveled his large monitor around to face them. He hit a key. The screen lit up. It was the security footage from the crest. He hit play. In stark, silent, high definition, we all watched it again. We saw Madeline drop the purse. We saw her crouch. We saw the vial, the powder, the flick of the wrist. We saw her stand up. Griffin hit another key, and the video from the mirror angle played on a split screen, showing a clear, undeniable close-up of her face as she did it. The metadata is embedded, Griffin said clinically. It's time-stamped. It's admissible. It is in legal terms a slam dunk. There is no plea bargain here. There is no reasonable doubt. You will be convicted. The only question is for how long. Leo made a sound. A low, wretched, animal-like moan. He had his head in his hands, his body rocking back and forth. Oh God, Madeline, what did you do? What did you do? Madeline was beyond tears now. She was in a state of pure, frozen panic. She just stared at the screen, at her own mirrored face poisoning the glass. So, Griffin said, turning the monitor back toward himself, that is where you stand. 10 to 15 years in a state prison. You will be 39, maybe 44 years old when you get out. Leo here will be, well, he'll be visiting you on weekends, I suppose. I had remained silent through all of this, just watching. I watched the arrogance drain out of her. I watched the weak, pathetic foundation of my son's life crumble into dust. Finally, Madeline looked at me. Her eyes were desperate, pleading. She was a cornered animal looking for any possible escape. Harry, she whispered. Her voice was unrecognizable. It was broken. Harry, please. You posted my bail. You wouldn't do this. Please. I'm your family. I'm family. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. I set the cup down in its saucer without making a sound. I looked at her. Family, I repeated. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. You're right, I said, my voice quiet. You are. And that's the only reason you're here, Madeline. It's the only reason you're not in a holding cell right now. A tiny, desperate spark of hope lit up in her eyes. Then you'll stop this. You'll tell them to drop the charges. Oh no, I said. The charges are very, very real. But I leaned forward. I am offering you a choice, a way out. Not for your sake, but for my son's. Leo looked up, his face a tear-streaked ruin. Dad! I looked at him. My son. The boy I had raised. the man who had sat by and watched his wife try to destroy me. "This is your one and only chance," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the marble floor at the crest. "You are going to listen to Mr. Griffin, and you are going to do exactly as he says." I let the silence in that $50,000 a day office stretch out thick and heavy as concrete. I let them sit in the ruin of their own creation. Leo was rocking back and forth, his face buried in his hands, making a small, keening sound. Madeline was just broken. The fire from the night before was gone. All that was left was the ash. She finally looked up, her eyes bypassing Griffin, completely fastening on me. Her face was a ruin. Mascara had run in black, sticky tracks down her pale cheeks. Her expensive hairstyle was matted on one side. She looked cheap. "Harry, please." Her voice was a cracked, desperate whisper. It was the first time she hadn't used my first name like an equal. She wasn't a partner in a negotiation anymore. She was begging. "Please." She sobbed, fresh tears welling up and spilling over. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it was that strong. I got it from a friend. They said it would just make you sleepy, confused, just for a little while." I just stared at her. I said nothing. My silence was the wall she was now forced to climb, and she was scrambling. "We didn't want to hurt anyone," she cried, the words tumbling out in a desperate, ugly torrent. "It wasn't about that. It was just the party, your speech. We just had to stop the speech." Griffin leaned forward, his voice like ice. "Stop the speech? Why, Mrs. Blackwood? Why was this speech so important that you would risk poisoning your father-in-law? Because of the money!" She shrieked, the raw, ugly truth finally clawing its way out. "The money, we needed the money. We couldn't let him. We couldn't let him just give it all away." She was openly sobbing now, a desperate animal sound. We're in trouble. We're in so much debt. We needed that inheritance, and he was just going to throw it all away on some stupid foundation. We were just trying to protect our family, our future." "Protect your future," I repeated. My voice was soft, bewildered. I turned to Griffin, my face a mask of perfect, heartbroken confusion. "Griffin, what? What is she talking about? What money? What inheritance?" I looked back at Madeline and Leo, my expression full of feigned hurt. My 401k? Is that what this is about?" I shook my head as if wounded to my core. "Madeline, Leo, I was going to help you. Of course I was. My pension isn't huge, but it's enough. And the house would be yours one day, you know that. Clara and I always said that." I put on my most pathetic, wounded old man expression. Why would you do this? For my retirement savings. It's not that much money." My feigned ignorance. My talk of a pension and the house. That was the final breaking point. It wasn't Madeline who snapped. It was Leo. He shot up from the sofa. The expensive leather cushion hissed in protest. His face, which had been pale and defeated, was now a deep, blotchy red. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with a lifetime of perceived injustices. "Stop it!" he roared. His voice cracked, echoing in the silent, sound-proofed office. Madeline stopped crying, her mouth hanging open. Just stop playing dumb," he screamed at me. "Stop acting like the innocent old man. We know, Dad, okay? We know." I just looked at him. My face was still a mask of confusion, but inside the ice was spreading. "No, what, son? I don't understand. What's—" "The money!" he screamed, his fists clenched at his sides, his whole body trembling. Not your stupid 401k. Not the house, the money. The $35 million. There it was. The ugly, greedy heart of it all finally laid bare for everyone to see. Griffin sat back in his chair, slowly crossing his arms. He was enjoying this. 35 million. Leo was breathing heavily now, almost hyperventilating. You sold our company for $35 million, and you were going to give it all away, all of it. He took a staggering step toward my desk, his finger pointing at my chest. You were going to stand up at that party and give away our future, and you were only going to give me 1 million. One. As if I'm nothing. His voice was shaking with a raw, profound, and childish rage. It was the tantrum of a spoiled boy who had just had his favorite toy taken away. After everything I've done for you, he bellowed. After all the years I supported you. After Mom died, was the one who was here. And this is how you repay me. You humiliate me. You leave me crumbs. I let his words echo in the expensive, soundproofed room. Crumbs. Repay you. What you've done for me. The tantrum was over. He was standing there, breathing heavily, his face a mask of furious self-pity. Madeline was watching him, her earlier terror now replaced with a new hungry look. He had just confirmed everything. He had just confessed to the motive in front of lawyers and police. I looked at my son. The boy I had taught to ride a bike. The young man I had sent to college. The man who had just watched his wife try to chemically lobotomize me for money. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The quietest sound in the room was now my voice, and it was the only one that mattered. What you've done for me. I repeated my voice, flat, cold, and curious. I leaned forward in my chair, steepling my fingers. I looked him dead in the eye. Tell me, Leo, what exactly have you done for me? The question hung in the air. It was so simple, so direct, and he had no answer for it. He blinked. The righteous crimson rage on his face began to falter, replaced by a pale, sputtering confusion. He stammered, looking around the room as if the answer might be written on the mahogany walls. I was there for you. You were there for me. I repeated, nodding slowly. When? After Mom died, he said, his voice rising again, grasping at this new justification. I was there. I helped you. I helped you manage things. I stayed with you. I managed your expectations. Managed my expectations, I said. I almost smiled. It was so pathetically corporate, so Madeline. You mean you managed my expectations about you, about your constant need for support? No, he said, but his voice was weak. I helped you through your grief. I made sure you were okay. You made sure I was okay, I said. I let the silence hang again, just for a beat. I remembered the year after Clara died. I remembered working 18-hour days because the grief was a physical, crushing weight, and the only thing that kept me breathing was the logistics, the numbers, the work. I remembered Leo visiting, yes. He visited to ask for a loan to buy a new sports car because his depressed old man needed something to cheer him up. He visited to ask for my help with a down payment on the condo he shared with Madeline. He visited to ask me to co-sign a business loan. He wasn't there for me. He was at me. He was a vulture, picking at the scraps of my life, my grief just an inconvenient obstacle in his path to my wallet. You were there, Leo, I said softly, and he almost looked relieved. You're right. You were there. I turned my head slowly away from my son, and looked at Griffin. "Griffin," I said, my voice cutting, "my son believes he's been an asset to me. I think it's time we review his performance." "No," I said. My voice was no longer soft. It was cold, hard, and flat. It was the voice I used in the boardroom when a multi-million-dollar deal was falling apart, the voice that made grown men tremble. Leo flinched. "You weren't there for me," I said, leaning forward. "You were at my wallet. Griffin, show them the statements." Griffin, who had been waiting for this cue, didn't move. He simply tapped a key on his laptop. The massive 60-inch flat-screen television on the wall, which had been disguised as a painting of a serene ocean, flickered to life. What's this?" Leo stammered, looking at the screen. "This, Leo," Griffin said, his voice filling the room, "is your performance review, as your father puts it." On the screen, a document appeared. It was a credit card statement, an American Express Platinum card, in Leo's name. "Leo Chias," Griffin said, "this is your personal credit card statement for the last 5 years. Let's review, shall we?" He clicked a button. A summary page appeared. 5 years of expenditures. Restaurants, $65,000. Vacations, $90,000. Clothing and personal goods, $120,000. Miscellaneous cash advances, $25,000. Total outstanding debt on this one card, $302,000. Madeline made a small choking sound. She was looking at the screen, her eyes wide with disbelief. It was clear she hadn't even known the full extent of his spending. But, Leo was pale. I pay my bills. You pay the minimum, Leo," Griffin cut in his voice like a whip. "You've been paying the minimum interest-only payment for 36 consecutive months. You're not paying it down. You're drowning. And your salary at your mid-level marketing job barely covers the interest, let alone the principal." He clicked again. A new set of documents appeared. Student loans. "And Madeline," Griffin continued, "these are for you. $150,000 in student loans for a degree in art history. An impressive sum. You have not made a single payment on the principal in the 4 years since you graduated. You've deferred, and deferred, and deferred. The interest alone has added another $30,000 to your debt." That's private," Madeline gasped, her face flushing a deep, ugly red. "You have no right." "I have every right," I said quietly. She turned to me. "Because I co-signed that loan for you, Madeline, as a wedding gift. A gift you apparently forgot all about. And the bank informed me last week that your deferment is ending. The first payment of $2,000 is due in 30 days. Madeline looked like I had slapped her. "And now," Griffin said, clicking one last time, the main event. A bank statement appeared on the screen. A checking account. It was their joint account. "Your current checking account balance," Griffin read, "is $312. Your mortgage payment of $4,000 is due tomorrow. You are to use the technical financial term completely and utterly bankrupt. You are 1 day away from total financial collapse." The room was silent. The only sound was the quiet whir of the computer. Leo and Madeline were just staring. They were staring at the raw, undeniable, ugly truth of their lives broadcast in high definition on a 60-inch screen. All their posturing, all their talk of sophistication, all their judgment of my old suit, it was all a lie. They were children playing dress-up in a house of cards that was about to collapse. "So you see, Leo," I said, my voice soft again, "you weren't managing my expectations. You were just desperate. You were drowning. And you looked at my $35 million not as a father's legacy, but as a life raft. And you were willing to drug me, to humiliate me, to have me committed just to get your hands on it. Leo finally broke. He sank back onto the sofa, not a word of protest left in him. He just put his head in his hands and began to sob. Ugly, racking, pathetic sobs. I looked at my son. He was a ruin. A 40-year-old man sobbing into his hands, his body shaking with the pathetic, ugly grief of a child who had just been caught. He was crying not because he was guilty, but because he had been found out. He had just screamed about all he had done for me, how he had supported me after Clara died. Supported me, I repeated, my voice quiet. I looked at him, and the last shred of pity I had for him evaporated. You didn't support me, Leo. You cost me. He looked up, his face streaked with tears and confusion. What? What are you talking about? This support you gave me, I said. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about your career. I turned to Griffin. He knew his cue. Leo, Griffin said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. You started a tech company 3 years ago, correct? Leo Logics. An app for, what was it, streamlining social media for pets? Leo's head snapped up. How did you know about that? That failed. It didn't work out. It has nothing to do with this. Oh, but it does, I said, leaning forward. You told me you had to shut it down. You told me you just couldn't find the right investors. You told me how hard you worked, how you poured your life into it. Was that another part of the support you were giving me by managing that failure? I did work hard, he said, his voice rising defensive. The market just wasn't right. The market was fine. I cut in, my voice like ice. The product was absurd. And you know who your primary secret investor was? The angel investor who kept funding your fantasy for 2 solid years, long after any sane businessman would have pulled the plug. Leo just stared at me, his mouth half open. The dawning horror on his face was almost painful to watch. You had an angel investor, Madeline whispered, her eyes suddenly sharp. She looked at Leo, a new greedy calculation appearing on her face. You never told me. He didn't know, I said. Did you, son? I looked at Leo. He was shaking his head, a slow, denying motion, but his eyes showed the terrible truth was finally landing. It was me, Leo, I said. The words dropped into the silent room like stones into a deep, dark well. It was me. I was your angel investor. I was the anonymous backer, the fool who kept pouring good money after bad, just so you wouldn't have to feel the sting of failure, just so you could keep playing businessman, just so you could maintain this facade that you were managing on your own. I stood up from my chair and walked slowly toward him. He cringed as I approached, as if expecting to be hit. Do you know how much I supported you, Leo? Do you know the final cost of your little pet project? The one you managed so well? He was trembling, his eyes squeezed shut. $2 million, I said. Madeline made a sound, a sharp, choked gasp, as if she'd been stabbed. Her mind was instantly calculating. 2 million, on top of the 35. He has more. $2 million. I repeated, my voice low and dangerous, that I poured directly into a fire just to protect your fragile ego, to keep my son from having to admit he was a failure. That was my repayment for your support. I bought your dignity for you, son. And this is how you thank me. He was still on his feet, but he was hollowed out. He stared at me, his eyes blank, the words, $2 million, hanging in the air like a death sentence. He had built his entire identity around being the self-made son who had managed his own life, a life that was now revealed as a complete, humiliating, expensive fraud funded by the very man he was trying to destroy. Madeline was a different kind of broken. Her sharp, calculating mind, which I had seen work so quickly, was now just Gone. She wasn't crying anymore. She was just staring at the floor between her feet. She had bet everything on the assumption that I was a weak, senile fool. She had just discovered she was playing poker against a man who owned the casino, and she had just lost the house. They had tried to destroy the one person who had been secretly, silently holding their pathetic, debt-ridden lives together. I walked back to my chair and sat down. The power in the room had shifted so completely, it was almost a physical force. Griffin remained silent, a gatekeeper. I looked at them. Two broken children. "You wanted my money," I said. My voice was quiet, conversational. "You were willing to drug me, humiliate me, and have me locked away in a nursing home for it." Madeline flinched, the first sign of life. She looked up, her eyes wide with a new, desperate terror. "Prison," she whispered. "Griffin." He said, 10 years. "That's right," I said. 10, 15. With the evidence we have, the video, your confession in the ER, it's a certainty. She scrambled forward, literally falling off the low sofa onto her knees on the expensive rug. Her red dress was bunched up, her face a ruin of smeared makeup and tears. "Harry, please." She was crawling. "Please, I'll do anything. Anything. Don't send me to prison. Please, I can't." "Leo, say something. Tell him anything." "All right," I said. Her sobbing stopped, replaced by a sharp, hopeful gasp. She looked up at me like a dog waiting for a command. "You'll do anything." "Yes, anything, I swear." "Good," I said, "because I am going to offer you a way out. Madeline, you will not go to jail. I will instruct Mr. Griffin to give the police the video, but I will not press charges myself. I will state that it was an inter-family misunderstanding fueled by alcohol." She was about to thank me, a wave of pathetic relief washing over her face, but I raised my hand. "On one condition." "Anything," she breathed. I turned my gaze from her, from this stranger groveling on my lawyer's floor. I looked at my son, Leo. He slowly raised his head. His eyes were dead. "My condition," I said, "is not for Madeline. It's for you. You will sign a document right here, right now, renouncing all present and future claims to the Blackwood estate. You will give up your inheritance. All of it. The $1 million I had planned to give you, that's gone too. You will get nothing. Not a house, not a dollar, not a single cent. You will be legally disowned." "Dad," he whispered, his voice broken. You can't." "I can," I snapped. "And I am. That is the price for your wife's freedom. You want to protect your family. Madeline. Here is your chance. Convince your husband to sign away his future, or you will go to prison for a decade." Madeline didn't hesitate. She scrambled over to Leo and grabbed his arm. "Leo, sign it. He's right. Just sign it." "What does it matter? Sign the paper." "But the money," Leo stammered. "What money, Leo?" I laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "It's all gone, remember. It's going to the foundation. You're signing away nothing. You're just making it official." I looked at them both, two drowning rats in a barrel. "And let me be perfectly clear about the rest. The deal," I said, "is only for Madeline. It is not for her mother." Madeline's head snapped back. What about my mother, Cynthia?" I said. "Drank the poison you intended for me. She assaulted a waiter. She caused a riot in a public place. She will face the full consequences of her actions. I will not be helping her. I will in fact be cooperating fully with the restaurant's lawsuit against her for damages." "But she's my mother. And I said, "am your father-in-law. You seem to have a problem choosing between us. Let me make it simple. I nodded to Griffin. He slid a single-page document and a heavy gold-point pen across the desk. "And you two," I said, "will face your creditors alone. The $500,000 in debt you've racked up, that's your problem now. The mortgage payment that's due tomorrow. You'd better start making calls. I am done paying. The Bank of Harrison Blackwood is closed, permanently." "So, that's it," Leo whispered, his voice hollow. "It's all gone. That's it," I confirmed. "Griffin, the donation. Is it ready?" Griffin nodded. "The $35 million transfer to the Clara Blackwood Research Foundation will be executed tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., just as we planned." I stood up. I looked down at them. Madeline was pushing the pen into Leo's trembling hand. "Sign it, Leo. Sign it now." He took the pen. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He scribbled his name on the line, a pathetic, jagged line that looked nothing like his signature. It didn't matter. It was a legal binding contract. Griffin took the paper, reviewed it, and put it neatly into a file. It was done. I had just bought my freedom from them. "Now," I said, walking to the door and holding it open. "Get out of my office. Get out of my building. And get out of my life." Leo's hand was shaking so violently he could barely hold the heavy gold-point pen. The cheap polyester tie I was still wearing, the one she bought me, suddenly felt like a noose around my neck. "Sign it, Leo." Madeline hissed, her voice a raw, desperate whisper. She grabbed his trembling hand and physically forced it down toward the paper. "Just sign it. We can fix this later. Just sign it so we can get out of here." Fix this later. She still didn't get it. There was no later. Leo looked at me one last time, his eyes pleading, begging for a different answer, for a reprieve from the father he had never known. I just stared back, my face carved from stone. I offered him nothing. With a broken, shuddering sigh, he scribbled his name on the line. A pathetic, jagged scrawl that looked nothing like his real signature. It didn't matter. It was a legal binding contract. Griffin, with the precision of a surgeon, slid the document away from them. He reviewed the signature, nodded once, and placed it neatly into a new, clean file folder. He closed it. The soft thud was the sound of a door slamming shut forever. It was done. I had just bought my freedom from them. I had just disowned my only child. I stood up, walked to the tall mahogany door, and held it open. The hallway outside was bright, the real world waiting. "Now," I said, my voice empty of all emotion, "get out of my office, get out of my building, and get out of my life." Leo couldn't even stand on his own. Madeline, now just a hollow shell in a ruined red dress, had to pull him to his feet. They didn't look at me as they passed. They were no longer the arrogant, sophisticated couple who had entered the crest. They were just husks. Broken, empty, and bankrupt. I watched them go, two ghosts shuffling toward the elevator, already arguing in low, vicious whispers. I closed the door. The silence in the office was absolute. 50 floors above the city, you couldn't hear the traffic, the sirens, the noise. It was just the quiet, expensive hum of filtered air. I walked to the massive window, looking down at the city. I had helped build the city that was now home to the Clara Blackwood Research Foundation. "It's done, Harry," Griffin said softly from behind me. I didn't turn around. I just watched a plane, a silver speck, cut across the blue sky. "He's my son," I whispered almost to myself. "He was my son." "He made his choice, Harry," Griffin said. "They both did." I thought of Clara. I thought of her hand in mine in the sterile white hospital room. I thought of her last weak whisper. "Don't let it be for nothing, Harry. Make it mean something." I had failed my son. I had spoiled him. I had hidden my strength, and in my silence I had allowed him to become weak, greedy, and cruel. But I had not failed my wife. "The donation," I said, my voice firm again. "Is it ready?" Yes, Griffin confirmed. The $35 million transfer to the foundation will be executed tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp, just as we planned. I nodded. I had lost a son today, but I had kept my promise. The silence in the office was deafening. It was the sound of a future I had just erased. It was the sound of a legacy I had just secured. It was the sound of $35 million. And I knew, standing there, that this silence, this was the price. This story teaches us a powerful, if painful, lesson. Appearances are a dangerous illusion. The people who seem the most sophisticated can be the most morally bankrupt, while true strength often hides behind humility. It reveals how unchecked greed, especially for an inheritance, can poison family bonds beyond repair, turning love into a cold calculation. But most importantly, it shows that kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. Setting firm boundaries isn't cruelty. It's a necessary act of self-preservation. True wealth is not what's in your bank account, but the dignity you refuse to surrender. Have you ever been underestimated by people who thought they were better than you? Let us know in the comments what you thought of Harrison's final decision.